Welcome to Andre's Insight, where clarity meets curiosity. Today, we are opening up a topic that is, it's truly foundational to everything we try to do in our lives, the science of goal achievement. And you, the listener, sent us just a formidable stack of research on this. We've got everything from motivational psychology and advanced cognitive strategies to clinical interventions for things like executive dysfunction.
A really fascinating collection of material.
It really is. So our mission today is very, very specific. We're not just going to read through a list of tips. We're undertaking a proper deep dive to translate the most rigorous, the most data-backed frameworks into actionable protocol.
Right, things you can use immediately.
Exactly. Whether you're tackling a huge career change or, just trying to establish a healthier daily routine.
And this dive is all about rigor, isn't it? We're trying to move beyond the vague promises of willpower and motivational posters.
Oh, absolutely.
We're getting into the actual psychological machinery of commitment and maybe more importantly, follow through. The sources you sent give us this really comprehensive view, and they all seem to highlight that sustained success isn't primarily about desire or wanting it enough.
No.
It's about strategic structure. It's about advanced planning. And it's about using specific mental techniques that are designed to overcome the inevitable obstacles of reality.
The inevitable obstacles. And that's where the real work is. So we're going to establish why most goals fail before they even get off the ground. We'll look at how to engineer your planning process for maximum resilience, and we'll dig into some fascinating, really counterintuitive psychological levers that can turn a hopeful wish into a truly binding commitment.
Yeah, and we'll be connecting these high-level concepts, things like implementation intentions and self-efficacy, directly to the neurobiology of action.
Right down to the brain circuits.
You will, yeah. We'll explore why clarity is what prevents failure, how to use frameworks that bridge that massive gap between, say, fantasy and reality, and we'll even discuss the surprising role that visualizing potential failure plays in driving commitment forward.
I can't wait to get into that one.
So let's unpack all this. I think we should start with the necessary groundwork, the foundational architectures of goal setting that everyone really needs to master before they can even think about the high-leverage strategies.
Okay, let's start there. The non-negotiable step one. If you want to achieve anything, you need a blueprint. You need something that defines the target with absolute clarity. So across all these sources, what are the common foundational principles for defining a good goal? I guess we have to start with the big one, the SMART framework.
We have to. The SMART framework is, it's ubiquitous for a reason. It stands for specific, measurable, attainable, or sometimes you see achievable, relevant, and time-bound.
Right.
And it's popular because it forces precision. I think the number one enemy of goal achievement is vagueness. It's just ambiguity. If your goal is too abstract, your brain literally doesn't know where to direct its energy.
Specificity. That's really where we all fall down, isn't it?
Yeah.
Especially with personal improvement goals. If I say to myself, I want to be a better friend, that sounds admirable. But as a goal, it's useless.
It is entirely useless from a planning perspective because it provides no instruction, there's no verb, there's no action.
So how do we make that specific?
To operationalize it, you have to turn that feeling into a behavior. A SMART version would be something like, I will call or text 3 friends each week to check in and maintain our connection. See how that's an actionable behavior. It's not just a feeling you're chasing, it's a thing you can do.
And then the M, measurable, that's the progress tracker. This seems so critical because, if you can't measure it, you can't really manage it.
You can't. You're just guessing. The measurable component provides clear, objective metrics. So if you're dealing with a mental health goal, instead of that really vague, I want to feel better, you establish a quantifiable, specific action.
Like what?
For example, I will write in my journal for 5 minutes each day to process my thoughts. The metric is the 5 minutes. You can track it daily. Did I do it? Yes or no?
Right, it's binary.
It's binary. And similarly, in health, you shift from I want to eat healthier to I will eat 3 or more servings of fruits or vegetables a day, 5 days a week. This measurement provides this constant objective feedback, and that feedback loop is absolutely vital for sustaining motivation down the line.
Okay, what about the A and the R, attainable and relevant, or sometimes realistic? Do these two concepts, do they overlap, or are they doing 2 different jobs in the architecture of the goal?
That's a great question. They work together, but they address different realities, really. Attainable is about the practical side. Is this goal physically, financially, and logistically possible for you right now, given your current resources and constraints? Relevant or realistic, however, asks a much deeper question. It asks, does this goal actually matter to you in this season of your life? Is it aligned with your larger values or your main priorities?
Can you give an example of that split?
Sure. You might be physically capable of training for a marathon. That's attainable. But if your primary number one life goal right now is launching a new business.
Then the marathon isn't relevant.
Exactly. It might not be relevant to your current phase of life. It would just create goal conflict. And you'd probably end up failing at both because your energy is divided.
That distinction is so crucial. I mean, it pulls the goal out of a vacuum and forces you to check it against the entire context of your life.
It does.
Now, our sources also brought up an alternative model, which I found really useful. It's the ABC components. And this one seems to focus much more intensely on the internal, the mental state that's required for success.
That's right. While SMART really focuses on the external structure of the goal itself, the ABC model zeroes in on the internal belief system you need for goal commitment.
Okay, so what is ABC?
So A stands for achievable, which aligns perfectly with the A in SMART. But B is the really unique part, believable, and C stands for committed.
Believable. Okay, explain that more. Why is believable a separate thing from achievable? That seems like the same concept at first glance.
It's a subtle but profound difference. A goal can be perfectly achievable in theory. I mean, millions of people run a 10K race every single year. It's objectively possible.
Sure.
But if you, the individual, do not genuinely hold the deep conviction that you are personally capable of doing it, then your commitment, the C, will be fragile. It will shatter at the first sign of trouble, regardless of the goal's objective attainability.
So the believable component is a direct test of your personal self-efficacy.
That's it. It forces you to confront your own internal biases about your capabilities. If you don't truly believe you can sustain the effort, all the planning in the world just collapses.
And that ties directly into this trap of, grand ambition. We always hear this motivational mantra, go big or go home. But the research seems to suggest that setting these huge, overwhelming goals can be completely counterproductive.
It's often highly counterproductive. It's a critical psychological hurdle we create for ourselves. We need to understand that this belief in our capability, our self-efficacy, it's not acquired through wishful thinking or affirmations.
Right.
It's built incrementally, piece by piece, through successful mastery experiences. So when someone sets a massive, intimidating goal, say, going from 0 exercise to running a marathon in just 3 months, the required initial leap is so vast that failure to meet those early, unrealistic expectations is almost guaranteed.
And that just crushes your belief.
It catastrophically erodes self-efficacy. You tried, you failed, and your brain says, see, I told you we couldn't do this.
So starting small isn't about being unambitious. It's actually a deliberate strategy. You're engineering success to build that psychological foundation.
Precisely. It's the smartest way to start. If your huge long-term goal is to write a book, starting with a tiny goal of writing just 1 page a day is a mastery experience. It's both achievable and, crucially, believable. If your goal is to manage your stress, starting with just 10 minutes of guided meditation daily builds success and momentum far more effectively than aiming for an hour right out of the gate and then failing on day 2.
So that initial small success validates the whole effort and makes the next small step feel possible.
It makes it feel inevitable.
Okay, so we've talked about defining a single goal. Let's move on to a problem that I think everybody has, which is having too many targets at once. The danger of goal overload.
Goal overload is a severe cognitive tax. When you try to achieve multiple major goals at the same time, like improve my fitness, learn a new language, launch a side business, and redesign my home.
Which sounds like a standard New Year's resolution list for a lot of people.
It does, and it's a recipe for failure. You're preparing your brain poorly against distractions and fragmentation. But more than that, it makes it nearly impossible to develop habits.
And habits are the key.
Habits are the engine of long-term success. They are the automated behaviors that carry you forward when motivation is low. And they require focused, consistent repetition on one thing at a time.
The sources offer a really straightforward, practical solution here, which is the most important task method, or MIT.
Yeah, the MIT method is an excellent antidote to that feeling of overwhelm. It forces you to be strategic with your prioritization. The rule is simple. You must pick the 1, 2, or at most 3 most important tasks for the day.
And these are the tasks that yield the biggest impact toward your main goal.
The biggest impact, yes. The rest of it. The lower priority emails, the less critical errands, you schedule it for later or you just discard it entirely. This prevents that feeling of being swamped by an endless flat to-do list.
Right.
And it ensures that your limited daily energy, your limited willpower, is invested where the return is highest. That's how you maintain momentum.
And this focus on prioritization, it relates directly to the science of cognitive performance, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The sources are really clear. Multitasking is a myth. It just disrupts focus, depletes your energy, and increases stress.
It's one of the biggest myths of productivity. Our brains don't actually multitask efficiently. What we're really doing is rapid, inefficient task switching.
Like a computer with not enough RAM.
That's a perfect analogy. And this constant switching disrupts your focus, it drains the energy reserves you need for deep work, and it actively prevents the state of optimal cognitive engagement that we call flow.
The flow state.
By rigorously sticking to single tasking, focusing entirely on those 1 or 2 MITs, you give your mind the necessary runway to enter that flow state. And that's where you see enhanced creativity, better decision-making, and a significant reduction in the perceived effort over time.
So the big message from this first part is really about strategic simplicity. Define your target with brutal specificity, using something like SMART or ABC, and then ruthlessly protect your focus by prioritizing only the most impactful steps.
That's the foundation. Get that right, and everything else becomes easier.
Okay, so part 1 was about setting the compass, getting the direction right. Part 2 feels like it's about drawing the map, and specifically planning for all the rough terrain you know you're going to hit.
Exactly. Once a goal is clearly defined, the really hard part is execution. It's the day-to-day grind. So we have to shift from what we call motivational strategies, the wanting of the goal, to volitional strategies.
Volitional. So that's about will, about action.
It is. It's the doing. It's about protecting the goal from real-world resistance, from friction, from your own bad habits.
And the research points to one strategy as being the simplest, yet maybe the most effective volitional strategy there is. If-then planning, or what the researchers call implementation intentions.
Yeah.
How does this strategy actually work on a psychological level? What's the mechanism?
Implementation intentions are, I think, brilliant because they automate your decision-making in advance. They create a strong, often non-conscious mental link between a specific situational cue, that's the if part, and a predetermined behavior, which is the then part.
So the structure is very strict.
Yeah.
If situation X happens, then I will do behavior Y.
It has to be that strict. The power lies in bypassing the need for conscious willpower right in that critical moment when the situation arises. That's when you're most vulnerable.
Okay, so give me an example. Let's say my goal is to save more money, but my trigger, my cue, is seeing an online sale in my inbox.
Okay. A standard weak intention would be, I plan to save money this week. That's just a wish.
Right.
An implementation intention is, if I see an email notification for a sale from my favorite clothing store, then I will immediately delete the email without opening it. By pre-committing to that specific action linked to that specific cue, you short-circuit the whole reflective, deliberative process. You don't have to debate with yourself. That's where motivation usually fails. The decision is already made.
And the research shows this really works.
The research is overwhelming. This kind of planning dramatically strengthens your readiness to act and makes the desired behavior almost automatic.
But the sources did note something important. For sustained, really complex behaviors, like keeping up a fitness regimen for months, these simple win plans often fall short. Why is that?
Because life is more complicated than a single cue. Simple win plans like, I plan to go to the gym on Tuesday, are great for initiation. And the studies show a huge correlation with initial attendance. People go that first Tuesday.
But then the next Tuesday, they're tired.
Exactly. They don't account for reality. Life intervenes. The more complex the behavior, the more elaborate the planning has to be. So for these big health goals that require sustained engagement, the research suggests you need to integrate not just when you'll act, but how you'll do it, and crucially, how you'll overcome specific, predictable barriers.
Okay, so you build the contingency plan right into the main plan.
You have to.
So instead of just, if it's Tuesday, then I will go to the gym, we need something more robust. Like, If I feel too tired after work on Tuesday to go to the gym, then I will put on my running shoes and walk briskly for 15 minutes around the block instead.
That's a perfect resilient plan. That flexibility, which you've embedded in advance, is what creates resilience. It's preemptive problem solving. It acknowledges that the simple plan will be derailed. So the best plan is the one that has multiple pre-programmed recovery actions for the most common failure points.
I love that. Flexibility embedded in advance. Okay, let's move to a strategy that, at first, sounds almost contradictory. It's called mental contrasting, or MC. We spent all this time building up our belief and positivity, and now we're told to reflect deeply on the negative reality. What exactly is this process?
Mental contrasting is a really powerful goal-setting strategy that was developed by a researcher named Gabriel Udingen. Its purpose is to transform a hopeful, positive fantasy into a binding, real-world goal commitment. And it's a very structured cognitive exercise that only involves 2 steps.
Okay, walk us through the 2 steps.
Step 1. You vividly imagine the desired future, the best possible outcome of achieving your goal. You really let yourself feel it, see it, imagine how it impacts your life. You indulge in the fantasy.
Okay, so you're enjoying the dream.
For a moment, yes.
Hmm.
Then, step 2. You immediately pivot and reflect just as deeply on the negative reality, the internal or external obstacles that are currently standing in your way. And this isn't just a quick note. It's an immersive reflection on the current unpleasant reality. It could be your struggle with distraction, your lack of money, or your deep fear of failure.
And why is holding both of those things, the positive fantasy and the negative reality, in your mind at the same time so powerful? What does that do?
The psychological mechanism is called conjoint elaboration. When the desired future and the negative reality are made simultaneously accessible in your mind, the contrast between them is stark. It makes the negative reality pop out as a concrete, necessary obstacle that has to be overcome.
It makes the problem real.
It makes it real and urgent. This realization creates a psychological tension that generates the necessity to change. That feeling of necessity is what creates the binding goal commitment. It's no longer just a nice idea, it's a problem that needs to be solved.
But the sources add a really critical caveat here. This mechanism only works effectively under specific conditions, and it has to do with your expectation of success.
This is the most crucial insight about mental contrasting. It works as a kind of diagnostic tool for your own goals.
How so?
If, after contrasting the desired future with the reality, your expectations of success, your self-efficacy are high, a strong commitment is automatically formed. Your brain allocates energy and resources to the goal. It says, this is important and we can do it, let's go.
Okay, but what if your expectations are low?
Then the opposite happens. If your expectations of success are low, your mind correctly diagnoses the goal as maybe too difficult or perhaps just irrational for you right now. And so commitment remains weak or non-existent. MC helps people wisely allocate their energy only to the goals they actually believe they can achieve.
So it's a filter. It stops you from committing to goals that are doomed from the start.
Precisely. It protects your resources for the battles you can actually win.
This sounds like the ultimate one-two punch then. MCII. That's mental contrasting with implementation intentions. So if MC tells you if you should commit and what the main obstacle is, then the implementation intention tells you how you're going to attack that obstacle automatically.
That is exactly the synergistic power of MCII. They are designed to work together. Mental contrasting provides the critical reality-based input. It helps you define the binding goal and, most importantly, identify the most salient internal obstacle.
The thing that's really holding you back.
Yes. And then the implementation intentions provide the automated output. You create the specific, protective, if-then plan for overcoming that exact obstacle you just identified.
So the MC part actually generates the content for the 202 part.
Perfectly said. Participants in MCII studies, they don't just autonomously define their desired future. Because of that contrasting step, they easily and accurately identify the obstacle they need to formulate their if obstacle, then I will behavior plan. This combination of autonomy and clarity makes the whole process far more effective than using either strategy alone.
Okay, let's talk about visualization, because this is an area where I think a lot of popular advice gets it wrong. Our sources give us a truly counterintuitive directive. Visualize the process, not just the outcome, and maybe even foreshadow failure. Why is pure outcome visualization, just picturing yourself on the podium, sometimes detrimental?
Focusing only on that beautiful end result often leads to what researchers call wishful thinking. It feels really good. It releases some of that psychological pressure, but it doesn't actually spur you to action.
Why not? It feels like it should be motivating.
because you get a temporary hit of the reward without doing any of the work. The danger is that the brain can confuse the fantasy with the achievement, which actually reduces your drive to execute the difficult steps required to get there. You've already tasted the victory, so the urgency is gone.
So we need to shift the focus of our visualization to the actual work required.
We have to visualize the process. Effective visualization means vividly picturing the necessary effort. You picture the daily grind, the specific moments of temptation or fatigue, and you visualize yourself choosing the right action in those moments.
So you're mentally rehearsing.
You are. You picture yourself sitting down at the desk when you're tired, overcoming that urge to procrastinate, and pushing through a specific difficult paragraph. This kind of process visualization leads directly to better resource planning and less procrastination, because your mind is already prepared for the effort it's going to take.
And now for the most surprising finding, I think, in this whole section, the power of foreshadowing failure. Why does visualizing obstacles or even failure actually help maintain ongoing action better than just visualizing success?
It comes down to psychological preparedness and really risk assessment. When you visualize failure or you visualize obstacles, you are actively simulating the challenge. You're running a mental fire drill. And this increases your vigilance and your problem-solving readiness. Studies suggest that visualizing success is great for getting started. It boosts that initial motivation.
Right, for the launch.
Exactly. But for sustained effort, for that long, hard middle part of any goal, foreshadowing the difficulties creates a heightened sense of urgency and necessity. You anticipate the disruption, and you're ready to deploy your implementation intentions. It keeps you locked onto the path when things get tough.
This is where we shift from the planning strategies, the what to do, to the internal psychological fuel. We've kind of established that belief, or maybe the lack of it, is the ultimate decider of commitment. So let's go deep on the concept that governs all of this. Self-efficacy.
Self-efficacy is the bedrock. It truly is. It's defined as the belief in your ability to successfully perform a specific task or handle a particular situation. It's that core conviction that you possess the skills and the knowledge needed to overcome a specific challenge.
Okay, and let's be crystal clear about the difference between self-efficacy and just general self-esteem, because I think people confuse those two all the time.
They do, and the distinction is vital. Self-esteem is a broad, global evaluation of your self-worth. It's your overall feeling about who you are as a person. Self-efficacy is focused and task-specific. It's laser-focused. You can have very high self-esteem, a good sense of your worth as a human being, but have very low self-efficacy for giving a public speech if you haven't practiced or had successful experiences in that particular area.
So I can feel good about myself in general, but still be terrified and feel incompetent about one specific thing.
Exactly. High self-efficacy in one domain, say. Your job does not guarantee it in another, like your fitness goals. It's a context-dependent belief.
And how does having high self-efficacy practically shift the way a person approaches action and, maybe more importantly, setbacks?
It changes everything about their cognitive and emotional resilience. Individuals with high self-efficacy, they take on harder challenges, they set higher goals for themselves, and they demonstrate much greater perseverance in the face of difficulty.
And when the setbacks happen, which they always do.
When they inevitably occur, they don't interpret them as proof of personal incompetence. They see them as temporary obstacles or just informational feedback that requires a change in strategy. They bounce back quicker.
And low self-efficacy.
It's a huge driver of procrastination. Because if you lack the core belief in your ability to perform the necessary actions, you just avoid starting entirely. What's the point?
You mentioned earlier that the most powerful evidence of our capability comes from these personal achievements, these mastery experiences. But the research points to 3 other sources that also feed into our self-efficacy, right? I think we need to cover the full spectrum.
Absolutely. The research, mostly from Albert Bandura, identifies 4 key sources that generate and strengthen self-efficacy.
Okay, what are they?
Number 1 is mastery experiences. This is the most potent source by far. Your own personal achievements gained through effort and perseverance provide irrefutable evidence that you can succeed. Every small win, every task you complete, it validates your capability.
So personal proof.
Personal proof. The second is vicarious experiences. This is watching others, especially people you perceive as similar to yourself, successfully perform a task. Seeing a peer handle a difficult situation makes it feel attainable for you too. It plants a seed of possibility.
Right, if they can do it, maybe I can too.
Precisely. The third source is verbal persuasion. This is receiving encouragement and coaching from credible sources. People you trust telling you, you can do this, I know you have the skills. This helps, especially when your own effort is flagging.
But it's less powerful.
It's much less powerful than mastery because talk alone doesn't sustain your belief when real difficulty strikes. You need proof. And the fourth source is interesting. Physiological and affective states.
What does that mean?
It's how you interpret your body's response to a challenge. If you interpret physical symptoms like a rapid heart rate or sweaty palms as excitement or readiness, I'm psyched up for this, it can actually boost your efficacy. But if you interpret those same signals as debilitating anxiety, oh no, I'm panicking, it lowers it.
So the story you tell yourself about the feeling matters.
The story is everything.
That makes the process of building belief a really strategic, multi-layered endeavor. It's not just one thing.
Not at all.
Now, let's pivot from that to the larger context of motivation itself, which the sources say relies on satisfying some basic psychological needs.
Yes, we're moving into what's known as self-determination theory, or SDT. This theory posits that our psychological health and well-being depend on the satisfaction of three innate psychological needs. And these aren't learned desires. They're seen as universal requirements for optimal human functioning.
And those three are?
Competence, relatedness, and autonomy.
Okay, explain how competence and autonomy relate directly to our goals. We've touched on competence already.
Competence aligns perfectly with self-efficacy. It's our innate need to feel effective in what we do, to master challenges. Autonomy is the need to feel like you are the source and the owner of your own actions. That you are doing something because you choose to, not because you are being forced or controlled.
And when goals are pursued under conditions that satisfy those needs, that's when motivation becomes intrinsic.
Right, that's the key. And the distinction between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation is absolutely vital for long-term health and performance.
Break that down for us. Intrinsic versus extrinsic.
It's the difference between durable, lasting engagement and just temporary compliance. Intrinsic motivation is when you engage in a task for its own inherent enjoyment and satisfaction. It's facilitated by autonomy and competence, and it leads to superior learning, higher performance, and better overall well-being. You do it because you love it.
And extrinsic.
Extrinsic motivation is when you're doing the task for some separable outcome, like a reward, a grade, or to avoid punishment. The big challenge with goal setting is that if goals become overly tied to these external rewards or deadlines, they can increase that extrinsic motivation and actually harm the underlying intrinsic joy of the activity.
They can kill the love for it.
They absolutely can.
The sources provided some really compelling evidence about this link between autonomy and actual health outcomes. It's not just about doing the right behavior, but why you're doing it.
That was an astonishing finding, wasn't it? The research indicates that undertaking a health behavior voluntarily, autonomously, results in measurably better physiological outcomes.
Like what?
Things like improved blood pressure regulation and superior stress hormone management, compared to someone who's performing the exact same behavior but feels forced or pressured into it. Your autonomy, your feeling of choice, literally makes the effort healthier for your body.
That is incredible. Okay, finally, in this section, we have to acknowledge that goal science doesn't operate in a vacuum. It's all happening inside a social context. How do cultural nuances, specifically this idea of individualism versus collectivism or tight versus loose cultures, how does that impact the need for these advanced goal strategies we've been talking about?
Cultural norms powerfully structure our behavior. They influence what goals are seen as desirable and even what's seen as feasible. In cultures that have a strong norm orientation, which researchers often call tight cultures, there are very strict rules and clear social expectations about how one should act, when, and where.
So the social script is already written for you, in many ways.
In many ways, yes. And if that's the case, how does that affect the need for something like an implementation intention?
I would guess it reduces the need for it.
Exactly. In these tight cultures, people often know a priori how to act. The situation dictates the correct behavior, which provides a high degree of external structure. This can reduce the immediate necessity for complex self-regulatory strategies like MCII, which are designed to create structure where none exists.
So what about the opposite, loose cultures?
In cultures with a weak norm orientation or loose cultures, there's much more social freedom and ambiguity. Individuals have to actively define their own goals and invent their own paths to implementation. Therefore, in these looser cultural settings, the tools we've been discussing become essential.
Hmm.
The discriminative ability of mental contrasting to help you define the best path, and the strategic automaticity of implementation intentions to help you execute that path become absolutely vital for success. The less external structure the world provides, the more internal structure you have to create for yourself.
We're now moving from that theoretical psychological engine to the actual nuts and bolts brain systems that facilitate goal pursuit. This is especially important when we're in high-demand environments or when the brain's go switch seems to be malfunctioning.
Right. And success in any goal absolutely relies on what neuroscientists call our executive functions, or EF.
It's the brain's high-level management system, isn't it? The CEO in your head.
It's the conductor of the entire orchestra. Executive function skills include organizing, prioritizing, shifting your mental focus flexibly, using your working memory to hold multiple pieces of information at once, and, of course, self-monitoring. When these are well-tuned, goal pursuit is efficient. When they're impaired, even the best SMART goal can feel completely impossible.
So let's get into the neurobiology of it. How does the brain actually manage goal attainment? What are the core cognitive processes at play?
Well, neurocognitively, goal pursuit requires at least 3 major processes that have to work in perfect harmony. First, you have goal maintenance. That's the ability to keep the representation of your desired target active in your working memory, especially when you're surrounded by distractions. You have to hold the goal in your mind.
Okay, what's second?
Second is performance monitoring. Your brain is constantly checking your current state against your target state to measure any discrepancies. It's the internal feedback loop that says, are we there yet? How are we doing?
And the third one sounds critical.
It is. Third is response inhibition. This is the ability to stop counter-goal behaviors, to resist a tempting distraction, or to interrupt an old, unhelpful habit that's trying to take over. It's the brain's brake pedal.
And do we know where in the brain that brake pedal is located? Where does the brain handle that crucial function of stopping an action?
We have a very good idea. Response inhibition is strongly associated with a region called the right inferior frontal gyrus, or the RIFG.
The RIFG.
Yes, this region is highly active whenever we have to override an automatic or habitual response that would lead us away from our goal. If your RIFG function is suboptimal for some reason, your ability to stop those counter-goal behaviors, like checking social media for the 10th time instead of working, is significantly impaired.
Now, for those who struggle most with just getting started, with initiation, like we often see in individuals with ADHD, the issue often isn't the wanting, it's the starting. And that brings us back to dopamine, doesn't it?
The dopamine factor here is profound. There's a brain circuit involving the basal ganglia that's central to generating both the go signal for initiating an action and the no-go signal for preventing an action. In conditions like ADHD, where dopamine regulation is often atypical, task initiation, especially for tasks that are boring, unclear, or a long way off runs on very low motivational fuel.
And this is where we get that concept of an interest-based nervous system.
Exactly. It's a great description. If the task isn't novel, interesting, personally challenging, or imminently urgent, the motivational dopamine hit just doesn't arrive. The go signal is weak.
Why is that? What triggers that dopamine release?
Dopamine is released most effectively when there's a reward prediction error. That is, when something positive and novel happens that exceeds your brain's expectation. A predictable, repetitive, boring task offers no such novelty, so the dopamine system doesn't signal "start now," and that leads to this intense feeling of inertia. It feels physically hard to begin.
So the goal for people who struggle with initiation isn't to just try harder, to push through with raw willpower, but to use external strategies to kind of bypass that dopamine deficit.
That's the only way that works. You can't will more dopamine into existence.
So what are the best science-backed strategies for task initiation?
We have to focus on externalizing the structure, making the motivation visible and tangible. One of the most fundamental tactics is the 5-minute rule.
Right, just commit to 5 minutes.
You commit to working for just 5 minutes. The goal isn't to complete the task. It's simply to build enough momentum to overcome the initial resistance. You're relying on the fact that once you're engaged in a task, switching away from it becomes cognitively expensive. An object in motion stays in motion.
And the challenge of visual management is also key, right? Because a long to-do list is inherently overwhelming to a brain with executive challenges.
Overwhelm is the enemy of executive function. So visual management involves chunking those large, intimidating tasks into very small, highly specific, concrete steps. You use visual checklists, and, this is the important part, you only display one task or substep at a time.
So you're not looking at the whole mountain.
You're not. You're just looking at the very next stone in the path. This reduces the cognitive load, it eliminates that overwhelming sense of the future workload, and it makes the initiation point simple and clear.
We also see the use of external support, like accountability partners, and this fascinating idea of body doubling, just working alongside someone else, even silently. Why is that so effective?
Body doubling works for a couple of reasons related to executive functions. First, the mere presence of another person provides a form of passive performance monitoring. It makes the task visible, and it reinforces your goal maintenance.
A bit of positive social pressure.
A little bit, yes. And second, and this is often more powerful, it creates a subtle sense of external urgency and novelty, which can be just enough to trigger that small, necessary burst of dopamine to initiate and sustain focus on an otherwise mundane task.
And there are therapeutic interventions that build on this.
Yes, goal-focused interventions like goal management training, or GMT, which specifically target these organization and planning difficulties, have shown significant improvements in both executive functioning itself and in secondary symptoms like anxiety in adults with ADHD.
Okay, let's pivot this to clinical goals in a broader sense. When people seek therapy for anxiety or depression, their initial goals are often very emotional. I want to feel less anxious. I want to stop feeling sad. Therapists have to redirect them toward behavior, don't they?
That redirection is one of the first and most essential steps in effective therapy. We've learned that therapy goals must be specific and behavioral, avoiding those broad emotional statements. The focus has to shift to what they want to do, the valued life direction they want to move toward.
And we see this very clearly in things like low-intensity psychological interventions, or LIPIs.
We do. LIPIs are brief, targeted, and highly structured treatments designed for mild to moderate mental health problems. They're not about overhauling someone's entire personality.
Can you elaborate on the structure of a LIPI? What does it look like?
A LIPI is usually short, and it's focused on teaching one or two specific evidence-based cognitive behavioral techniques. Things like psychoeducation, structured problem solving, cognitive restructuring, or graded exposure. For more complex clinical cases, the goal of the IPI has to be highly circumscribed, very narrow.
So, for instance,
the goal might be using structured relaxation techniques to reduce the physical symptoms of anxious arousal, like a racing heart. The goal isn't to treat the entire underlying anxiety disorder, which would require a much higher intensity long-term intervention.
you're targeting one specific manageable piece of the problem.
Exactly.
And how does a core CBT technique, like cognitive restructuring, link directly to goal setting? The sources mentioned the hot cross bun model.
The hot cross bun model is a simple visual that illustrates how our thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and physical sensations are all interconnected. A change in one affects all the others. Cognitive restructuring specifically targets the thoughts component of that model.
So give us an example.
Okay, take the example of a patient experiencing depression who holds the core thought, I am a failure. The goal isn't to instantly make them feel happy. The cognitive and behavioral goal is to first monitor that thought, then to identify the unhelpful thinking style, in this case it's all or nothing thinking, and then to actively challenge that thought by gathering evidence for and against it.
Like a detective.
Exactly like a detective. The ultimate goal is to develop a new, more balanced thought, like, I failed at this one task today, but I succeeded at 3 others this week. That new thought leads to a more flexible emotion and a more adaptive behavior. You're setting a goal to replace an unhelpful cognitive pattern with a functional one.
Finally, what about setting goals for individuals who are dealing with very severe challenges like psychosis? The focus there has to be incredibly concrete and functional.
It has to be. The clinical research is clear that for individuals with psychosis, the ability to generate goals is often intact, but the goals themselves have to be deeply rooted in tangible life functions and independence.
So what kinds of goals are we talking about?
Therapists need to establish explicit behavioral goals in major life domains. Things like getting back into part-time work, pursuing education, or achieving greater independence in daily living, like cooking or managing finances. Focusing on what the client wants to do to align with their core values provides a structured, hopeful path forward, rather than focusing solely on reducing symptoms, which can sometimes feel abstract and external to their actual lived experience.
We've spent the bulk of our time so far establishing how to make goals effective, how to build them and pursue them. But now we have to turn to the other side of the coin. We need to address the goals gone wild phenomenon,
The dark side.
the dark side. When they're improperly applied or maybe just excessively demanding, goals can actually cause significant harm, both to individuals and to entire organizations.
This is such a necessary reality check. We know that specific challenging goals are incredibly powerful motivators, but they can create a psychological blind spot, a phenomenon known as tunnel vision and narrow focus.
So the goal itself becomes the only thing that matters.
It does. The pursuit of the goal metric becomes so intense that employees, or even just individuals, start to overlook other important issues that fall outside the goal's direct scope.
Can you give us a concrete example of this kind of organizational failure, where the metric just completely superseded common sense of safety?
A classic case involves quality control in manufacturing. If a company sets an aggressive, single-minded goal for units produced per hour, workers may focus so narrowly on production volume that they start to overlook safety testing, quality checks, or collaborative communication that's necessary for the long-term health of the product and the company.
So they hit the target, but the product is faulty.
Exactly. The metric is achieved, but the organization suffers because of the neglect of all these non-goal variables. We see a similar thing when a sales team is given a revenue maximization goal instead of a profit maximization goal. They'll focus only on sales volume, without any regard for cost, and that can lead to massive strategic failure.
And what happens when we introduce stretch goals? You know, those highly challenging, almost impossible targets that are designed to push performance to its absolute limits.
Yeah.
The sources suggest they can actually promote unethical behavior.
They absolutely can. It's a well-documented risk. When the stakes are very high and the goal is extremely difficult to achieve, it can fundamentally shift a person's risk attitude. It promotes a self-serving bias and significantly increases the likelihood of them engaging in unethical or deceitful behavior.
Like what?
Things like lying about data, hiding problems, manipulating reporting metrics, anything to hit the target. The narrow focus, combined with immense pressure, causes individuals to rationalize actions they would never normally consider.
So how do you prevent that?
You have to have multiple layers of oversight and, just as importantly, consistent ethical modeling from the top leadership to mitigate that risk.
We also discussed earlier how goals can, ironically, damage intrinsic motivation. How does focusing on an extrinsic reward end up spoiling the fun of an activity?
Well, when in an activity that was previously enjoyable for its own sake, intrinsically motivating, becomes tied to an external goal and a reward, it becomes extrinsic. The individual's focus shifts from the process to the prize.
And the goal itself feels like a form of control.
It creates a feeling of external control, yes.
Nice.
If the reward is too dominant or the constraints are too rigid, the person feels less autonomous and less competent, and that undermines the very psychological needs that fuel intrinsic motivation in the first place. Once you take the reward away, the desire to continue the activity often just vanishes.
So to ensure the whole goal-setting process is sustainable and healthy, the sources really emphasize collaboration and flexibility. Why is collaboration so vital?
Collaboration involving the individual in the process of setting the goal is key because it directly satisfies that psychological need for autonomy. When a goal is handed down to you, it's compliance. When you help define it, it becomes commitment. And the research confirms this over and over. Collaborative goal setting significantly increases commitment and positively influences self-efficacy. This is vital in healthcare, for instance. There are tools like PrefCheck used by doctors to ensure that patients are actively participating in identifying their priority health problems. This ensures the resulting plan is believable and, more importantly, relevant to the patient's own life.
And then there's the problem of inflexibility, that feeling that the goal is this immovable object in a world that's constantly changing.
Rigid goals are doomed. They are almost guaranteed to decrease morale and productivity over time. We have to view a goal not as a single fixed destination, but as a direction of travel that requires constant mid-course correction.
And there was a statistic on this.
There was. A surprising statistic shows that over 70% of employees feel their work objectives are too inflexible. That highlights a massive systemic failure to recognize that the environment, resources, and personal circumstances are constantly changing. Goals have to have flexibility built into them to navigate unexpected obstacles. It's about fostering a culture of adaptability over rigid adherence.
We've talked about the beginning and the middle of the goal journey. Let's close with the end game. Reflection, and importantly, knowing when to disengage.
Monitoring and feedback are the final fuel sources for momentum. You have to check in. Regularly monitoring your progress, whether you're actively seeking information like weighing yourself or passively receiving data from an automatic tracker, strongly promotes goal attainment.
And does it matter what you're comparing yourself against?
Interestingly, not that much. It doesn't matter much whether you compare your progress against the future target or against a past performance. The simple act of feedback monitoring itself is the necessary information loop that informs your next action.
But sometimes that feedback tells you that continuing is irrational. And that can lead to what the sources called the action crisis.
The action crisis is a moment of intense psychological conflict. It's when an individual is genuinely caught between continuing a very difficult pursuit and acknowledging that the goal is currently unattainable and probably should be dropped. This crisis is associated with specific, measurable signs of effective physiological and cognitive distress. It's a painful place to be. Dealing with it requires wisdom, the wisdom to realize that persistence is only a virtue when the goal is still feasible.
And if we fail to disengage, not just behaviorally, but cognitively, we can fall into that dangerous cycle of rumination.
That's the trap. Self-focused rumination dwelling endlessly on past losses, mistakes, and failures is essentially the cognitive failure to let go of an unattained goal. Instead of learning and adapting, the mind just cycles through the disappointment and the regret.
And there's research on this.
There is. Research shows that ruminating participants are significantly less successful at moving past and letting go of unsolvable problems. The purpose of post-goal reflection, whether you succeed or fail, has to be, first, acceptance of reality, then deriving specific lessons learned, and finally, remembering to celebrate your accomplishments before you move on to the next thing. So what does this all mean when we put it together? Successfully achieving your goals is, well, it's not a simple feat of willpower. It's a holistic, tactical endeavor. It demands real precision in definition through things like SMART goals. It demands automated preparedness through implementation intentions. And it requires ruthless honesty in your self-assessment through mental contrasting.
And the key takeaway for me, and I think one of the most powerful insights from all these sources, is that planning for failure and actively confronting your obstacles is often a far more robust and lasting engine for action than just visualizing success.
Yeah.
That goal commitment, it relies heavily on having high expectations of success. But those expectations are only genuinely activated and tested when you strategically and honestly confront the negative reality that's standing in your way.
And here's where it gets really interesting for your next step, listener. We learned that self-regulation is widely described by researchers as being like a muscle. It needs consistent training. And we also learned that many of the foundational studies on these goal mechanisms were limited primarily to samples of university students in Western cultures.
Right. A very narrow slice of the population.
A very narrow slice.
So here's our final provocative thought. Considering the sheer complexity of all these goal mechanisms, the neurobiological underpinnings we discussed, and the profound influence of culture on what is even perceived as feasible, what entirely new frameworks or methods, beyond the current SMART and MCII models, are needed for researchers and policymakers to effectively train this self-regulation muscle across profoundly diverse global communities? How do we do this in a way that improves not just individual outcomes, but broader social stability? It suggests that the future of achievement lies not just in personal discipline, but in collective systemic planning and in much more culturally attuned strategic design.
That's it for this deep dive. We hope this has provided you with both clarity and curiosity for your own goal journey.